moment that broke everything open wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was my mother standing at the head of her own dining room table on her 70th birthday, raising a glass of sparkling cider toward my brother and saying, "To Daniel, for always being here when I needed him most." I was sitting 6 feet away from her. I had driven 11 hours to be there, and the reason she didn't know that, the reason she genuinely believed I had abandoned her for the past 2 years, was standing right next to her, smiling like he'd won something. My brother had made sure of it. Let me take you back, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. My name is Reese. I'm 31 years old. I'm a physical therapist, and until about 3 years ago, I thought my family was just normal. Not perfect, but normal. My brother Daniel is 6 years older than me, and growing up, the gap between how my parents treated us was something I learned to call just the way things are. Daniel was the first grandchild on both sides. Daniel graduated valedictorian. Daniel got into Penn State on a partial scholarship, and my parents paid the rest without blinking. When it was my turn, my father had just retired early and money was tight, so I took out loans. I didn't resent Daniel for that. Not really. You can't resent someone for being born first. What I did resent, what I should have paid more attention to, was the way Daniel always seemed to know exactly what buttons to push to make himself look indispensable and make me look absent. He'd mentioned to my parents casually that I seemed really busy lately, right before a holiday I'd already RSVP'd to. He'd forget to pass along my calls when I'd phone the house landline because my mom refused to learn how to use her cell properly. He'd tell my dad I was doing fine, doesn't really need help, right before my dad was about to offer to help me with a car repair I couldn't afford. Small things, individually dismissible things. But 2 years ago, they stopped being small. My mother had a minor stroke in the spring. Not severe, she recovered most of her function within a few weeks, but it scared all of us. My dad had passed 4 years prior from a heart attack, and I think the stroke cracked something open in all of us that we'd been carefully not looking at. My mum was getting older. She needed more support. Daniel stepped in immediately. He lived 40 minutes from my parents' house. I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, about a 6-hour drive, 11 by the time you account for mountain traffic and a couple of pit stops. Daniel offered to have my mum come stay with him and his wife Carla during her recovery. My mum said yes. I thought it was generous. I said so. I called my mum every 2 days during those first weeks. She always seemed happy to hear from me, but the calls got shorter and shorter. She'd say she was tired. She'd say Daniel had something planned. Once she said, "Daniel mentioned you might be coming to visit," in a tone that suggested she genuinely wasn't sure. I had told her I was coming the following weekend. I had confirmed it twice. When I showed up that Saturday, Carla answered the door with a look I couldn't read and said my mum was resting. I sat in their living room for 20 minutes before my mum came downstairs, looked at me with genuine surprise and said, "Oh, sweetheart. I didn't know you were coming." I felt something cold move through me. "Mom, I told you. I confirmed it on Thursday." She frowned. "I don't think so. Daniel said you called, but you didn't mention a visit." I had not spoken to Daniel on Thursday. I had spoken to my mother. Or I thought I had. I looked at Daniel across the room. He gave me a small symmetric smile and said, "Easy mix-up. Good that you're here." I let it go. I don't know why I let it go. Maybe because I wanted it to be a mix-up. Maybe because the alternative, that my brother had deliberately intercepted or misrepresented my call, was too ugly to sit with over dinner. That was my mistake. Over the next 8 months, I started keeping a record. Not because I'm paranoid, but because the pattern became impossible to ignore. My mum's cell phone, the one I'd set up for her 2 years ago, started going straight to voicemail every time I called. When I'd finally reach her through Daniel's home line, she'd mention things I'd supposedly said that I had never said. "You told me you weren't coming for Thanksgiving." I had sent a card, a pie from a local bakery shipped overnight, and a voice message confirming I'd be there the Wednesday before. I wasn't there Wednesday. I got a text from Daniel, sent Wednesday morning, saying my mum had asked him to let me know she wasn't feeling up to a big visit and wanted to keep the holiday small. I drove up anyway, arriving Thursday, and my mum cried when she saw me. Not happy tears, confused ones. I thought you weren't coming. Daniel said. She stopped herself. I asked gently what Daniel had said. She looked at the door where Daniel had just been standing and said, "Never mind, honey, you're here now." I started saving everything after that. Every text, every voice message. Every time I mailed something, I started using certified mail, so I had receipts. I bought my mum a new cell phone for Christmas, set it up myself, memorized the number, and told no one else in the family what it was. Within 3 weeks, she stopped answering it. When I asked her about it in person, she said Daniel had told her the new phone had a virus and he'd thrown it away to protect her. He had thrown away the phone I bought my mother, and she had let him because she trusted him. Because he was there every single day in her house, in her ear, and I was 6 hours away. I want to be honest about something. I understand how it happened. I understand that loneliness makes people vulnerable. My mum was 70 years old, widowed, recently recovered from a stroke, living in her son's house because it felt safer. Daniel wasn't a stranger. He was her child. If he told her I was pulling away, if he told her my calls were less frequent, if he shook his head sadly and said, "I don't know, Mom, she just seems less interested lately," she would have believed him. Why wouldn't she? But understanding how it happened didn't make it hurt less, and it didn't make what he did next forgivable. My grandmother, my dad's mother, Grandma Ruth, had passed a year before my dad, and she'd left me her jewelry collection. Not all of it. Most of it went to my dad, who then passed it to my mum. But a specific set, a pearl necklace, a garnet ring, and a bracelet that had belonged to Grandma Ruth's own mother, was left to me specifically in writing. It was in the will. The estate attorney had noted it. I had a copy. When I finally drove to Daniel's house for an unannounced visit, I'd stopped announcing visits because the announcements were being used against me. My mum mentioned offhandedly that she'd given some of Ruth's old things to Carla. I went very still. "Which things?" I asked. My mom described the pearl necklace. I said carefully, "Mom, those were left to me, in Grandma Ruth's will." She looked genuinely confused. She said Daniel had told her I'd said I didn't want them, that I didn't have space for jewelry, that I told him to go ahead and distribute what he wanted. I had said none of that. I had never said any of that. I had never been asked. I found Carla in the kitchen. She was wearing the bracelet. I don't remember exactly what I said in that moment. I know I kept my voice low. I know I asked to see it. Carla looked at Daniel, who had followed me in, and Daniel said, in the exact calm tone of someone who has rehearsed this, "Reese, Mom, made the decision. It's her call." "It wasn't her call," I said. "It was specified in the will." "Wills are complicated," he said. "Mom is the executor. She was not the executor. My father had been the executor. After my father died, the estate had been closed. Those items had already legally transferred to me. I knew this because I had spoken to the estate attorney 2 days later, shaking in my car in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel off I-26. He confirmed everything I already knew. The jewelry was mine. Giving it away wasn't my mother's call to make, and the attorney used a word that made my stomach drop: conversion. As in, taking property that belongs to someone else. As in, potentially actionable. I didn't want to sue my family. I want to be clear about that. That was never what this was about. What this was about was my mother's 70th birthday, 8 weeks away, and the party Daniel was throwing for her, and the invitation I'd received through the mail, printed, formal, like I was a distant acquaintance, with a note in Daniel's handwriting that said, simply, "Hope you can make it." He knew I would come. He was counting on it. I think he wanted me in the room. I think he wanted to watch. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the past 2 months preparing for a completely different kind of evening. I need to tell you about my cousin Nina because she is the reason any of this was possible. Nina is 2 years younger than me, has absolutely zero patience for family politics, and had been watching Daniel's behavior from the outside for years with an expression that could only be described as barely contained fury. She's also a paralegal. She'd been the one to suggest I document everything. She'd been the one to remind me that certified mail exists. And she was the one who, 3 months before my mother's birthday, sat across from me in a diner in Charlotte and said, "Reese, you have enough. You have everything you need. The question is what you want to do with it." I told her what I wanted. She said, "Okay, let's build it." What we built over the course of those 3 months was a folder. A physical folder, printed and organized with tabs, certified mail receipts, screenshots of texts, dated and time-stamped, a printout of Grandma Ruth's will with the relevant section highlighted, the estate attorney's letter confirming the jewelry's legal ownership, a timeline of phone calls, because I had started logging them, date, time, duration, who answered, what was said. And then there was the other thing, the thing I hadn't told anyone about yet except Nina. See, when I'd visited Daniel's house unannounced back in February, I'd borrowed my mum's reading glasses and left them on the kitchen counter. I'd gone back for them, and I'd walked past Daniel's home office with the door half open, and I'd heard him on the phone. He was talking to someone, I couldn't tell who, and he said, plainly, without any awareness that I could hear him, "She doesn't call anymore. I've told Mum that 3 or 4 times now. She's just not as close to us as she used to be. People drift." I stood in that hallway for a full 30 seconds. Then I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the reading glasses, said goodbye to Carla, and sat in my car for a while. I had not drifted. I had been told I'd drifted. Told to my mother repeatedly by someone who was systematically ensuring that the drifting was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Every phone call that didn't get passed along was evidence of my absence. Every visit he discouraged became proof that I didn't care. He was narrating a story about me to my mother, and I'd had no idea it was happening until I was already the villain of it. I want you to understand, this was not a misunderstanding. This was not a complicated family dynamic that both sides contributed to equally. This was deliberate, calculated. And it had been going on for years before I was paying close enough attention to see it. But I was paying attention now. My mother's birthday party was on a Saturday in October. Daniel had rented out the back room of a restaurant she loved, a family-style Italian place in their suburb, red checkered tablecloths, the whole thing. About 40 people. Extended family, neighbors, a few of my mum's friends from her church group. I arrived early. I found the manager, explained that I was one of the guest of honor's children, and asked if I could set something up at the table near the back wall. He said yes. Nina helped me. What we set up was simple. A laptop, a small HDMI cable connected to the restaurant's secondary display screen, normally used for sports, and a folder of documents I'd had printed at FedEx on cardstock, organized into envelopes with names on them. One for my mother, one for my Aunt Carol, who was my dad's sister and the closest thing to a family elder we had left. One for the estate attorney, which I'd already mailed but brought a copy of. And one for Daniel, which I did not intend to hand to him but wanted to have. I also had a phone call scheduled for 7:15 p.m. with the estate attorney, just in case. Daniel arrived at 6:30, saw me setting up, and crossed the room with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't know you were coming early," he said. "Surprise," I said. He looked at the laptop. "What's that for?" "Slideshow," I said. "For Mom." He studied me for a moment, then he nodded and went back to greeting people. The party started. My mum arrived at 7, on Daniel's arm, wearing a blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked happy and small and older than I remembered, and when she saw me across the room her face did something complicated. Surprise, relief, something else I couldn't name, and she crossed the room and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. "I didn't know if you'd come," she finally said. "I always come, Mum," I said. "I've always been trying to come." She pulled back and looked at me. There was something in her eyes. I think some part of her had been holding a question for a long time. Dinner was served. Daniel gave a speech. He talked about being there for their mother, about the daily calls, about the grocery runs and the doctor's appointments, and the sacrifices made without being asked. He looked at me twice during the speech. The second time, he smiled. Then he raised his glass and said, "To Mom, who deserves everything, and to the family that's always shown up." A few people glanced at me. My Aunt Carol gave me a look I couldn't read. I let the applause finish. Then I stood up. I hadn't planned to speak, which I think is why what came out felt real. I hadn't rehearsed it. I just said, "I want to show something. Mom, this is for you. This is what the last 2 years actually looked like." I connected the laptop. The screen behind me lit up. What I had put together was not a dramatic presentation. It was a document. A simple, dated chronology. First slide, a screenshot of a text I'd sent Daniel on October 14th, 2 years ago, saying I'd confirmed my visit with Mum for that Saturday. Second slide, a photo of the certified mail receipt for the birthday card and gift I'd sent her last year, signed for by Daniel J. Hartley. Third slide, the highlighted section of Grandma Ruth's will. I didn't narrate it loudly. I talked quietly to my mother like we were alone. I said, "Mum, I called you on October 12th. I confirmed I was coming on October 14th, and on October 15th, when I arrived, you didn't know I was there. I need you to understand, I was never pulling away. I was being kept away." The room had gone very quiet. I looked at Daniel. He had set his glass down. His jaw was tight. Carla was looking at her plate. I said, "The pearl necklace and the garnet bracelet that Grandma Ruth left me. They're specified by name in her will. I have a copy here. I have a letter from the estate attorney confirming that those items belong to me and that transferring them without my consent may constitute conversion under North Carolina property law." I put the envelopes on the table. One for my mum. One for Aunt Carol. "I don't want to fight about jewelry," I said. "I want my mother to know that I have been trying to reach her for 2 years. I want her to know that I logged every call, every visit, every card I sent, because I knew this moment might come, and I knew no one would believe me without proof." My mother picked up her envelope. She opened it. I watched her read the first page, the timeline, and I watched something change in her face. It was slow. It was like watching someone wake up from a very long dream, disoriented and blinking and not yet sure what's real. She looked up at Daniel. He said, "Mom, this is not Daniel." My Aunt Carol's voice was flat and final. "Sit down. There's a particular silence that comes after a truth lands in a room full of people who had been pretending not to know it. It's not empty. It's full of everyone recalibrating, quietly, running their own memories back through a different lens." My Aunt Carol had been suspicious of Daniel for years. She'd told me once, obliquely, that she thought he had a talent for making himself necessary. She never said more than that. After she read the timeline, she didn't need to say anything at all. She just reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. My mother cried. Not right away. She held it together through the dessert no one really ate, through the guests filtering out with careful averted eyes, through Carla disappearing to get their coats. She cried when it was just the three of us left at the table, her, me, and Aunt Carol, and she said very quietly, "I thought you didn't want to be close anymore. He kept saying you were busy, that you had your own life." "I have a 6-hour drive, Mum," I said. "That's not a different life, that's a Thursday." She laughed a little, which broke something loose in both of us. She said, "He threw away the phone." Yes. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me it had a virus." "Mom." "I know," she said. "I know. I am not going to tell you that everything resolved neatly after that night. Life doesn't work that way, and I am done with stories that pretend it does. What I will tell you is this. My Aunt Carol contacted the estate attorney the following Monday. The jewelry became a legal matter, not criminal, but civil, and Daniel was given the choice between returning the items or reimbursing me at appraised value. He returned the necklace. The bracelet Carla had worn so many times it had been repaired and reclasped, which complicated things. We settled on a payment. I don't love that, but I have the necklace now and I wear it. My mother moved out of Daniel's house in December. She lives in a senior independent living community now. Her choice? One she started researching the week after her birthday. She has her own space, her own friends, her own schedule. She called me from her new phone on the day she moved in and said, "I feel like myself again." I cried in the parking lot of my office. Daniel and I have not spoken directly since October. His wife sent me an email in November that began with, "I want you to know I had no idea about any of this." And maybe that's true. I genuinely don't know. But the bracelet was on her wrist for 8 months, so I haven't found the compassion yet to respond. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. What I know is that the family didn't fall apart the way Daniel seemed to assume it would if I ever told the truth. The family recalibrated. My Aunt Carol calls me more than she ever has. 3 of my mum's friends from the birthday party reached out to me separately. Apparently, they'd all noticed things over the years and hadn't known what to say. My cousin Nina came up to Asheville for a long weekend in January and we ate too much takeout and watched terrible television and she told me she was proud of me. I'm still 6 hours away. I always will be, probably. Asheville is my home now. My practice is here. My life is here. But I don't have to prove I'm here anymore. My mum knows I drive those 11 hours without being asked. She knows because she's read the certified mail receipts, because she has seen the timestamps, because the paper trail I kept out of desperation turned out to be the most loving thing I did for us, more than any individual visit, more than any card. It showed her, concretely, irrefutably, that she was never an obligation to me. She was always the point. She called me last week on a Tuesday for no reason, just to talk. We were on the phone for an hour and 15 minutes. She told me about a woman in her building who raises orchids. She tells me she'd tried a new recipe, chicken piccata, her first time making it, and it had turned out well and she was proud of herself. I told her I was proud of her too. She said, "I'm sorry, Reese, for not seeing it sooner." I said, "Mom, you were lied to by someone you trusted. That's not your fault, that's his." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I see you, baby. I see you now." That was enough. That was more than enough. That's the thing about truth. You have to be willing to build the case for it, carefully and quietly, even when no one's watching. Even when you're doing it alone in your car, logging phone calls in a notes app, driving 11 hours to a party where you don't know what's going to happen. You do it anyway, because some things are worth proving. And some people are worth fighting for. My mother is worth every mile. I've thought a lot about why Daniel did it. Not to excuse it. There is no excuse. But because understanding the mechanics of something ugly is how you make sure it never catches you off guard again. He didn't wake up one day and decide to be cruel. That's not how it works. It started smaller than that. A call not passed along. A visit quietly discouraged. A seed of doubt planted so gently my mother didn't even feel it go in. And then, because no one was checking, because I was 6 hours away and trusting that my family was functioning like a family, it grew. That's the thing about slow damage. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps compounding quietly until the distance between you and someone you love feels natural, inevitable, like it was always going to be this way. What I know now is that neglecting to defend the truth is its own kind of choice. I don't mean that as a criticism of my mother. She was lied to by her own son, and loneliness made her susceptible in ways that are deeply human and not shameful. I mean it about myself. For too long, I assumed that love was self-evident, that showing up would speak for itself, that my mother knew on some level that I was trying, and maybe she did. But feelings aren't evidence. Effort without a paper trail is invisible to someone who's been told, over and over, that the effort isn't happening. So I built the paper trail. Not out of strategy, not because I'm particularly clever, but out of desperation. And it turned out to be the most honest thing I ever did for us. Every certified mail receipt was me saying, I was here. Every timestamp screenshot was me saying, I did not disappear. The folder I handed my mother at that birthday dinner was 2 years of proof that she was never forgotten. That is not a cold or calculated thing. That is what love looks like when it has to fight to be seen. Daniel's choices caught up with him the way quiet wrongs always eventually do, not with a single dramatic unraveling, but with an accumulation of specifics that became impossible to dismiss. The phone he threw away, the jewelry he gave away, the calls he rerouted through himself so he could control what my mother heard. Each one, alone, could be argued. Together they told a story no one in that room could unhear. Nina once told me that integrity is just consistency in the dark. Doing the right thing when no one's watching, when there's no immediate reward, when it would be easier to give up. I kept calling. I kept mailing. I kept showing up. Not because I knew it would pay off, but because she was my mother, and what else do you do? The hardest part wasn't the confrontation. It was the years before it, when I was logging calls in a notes app at midnight, wondering if I was overreacting, wondering if maybe I really had drifted and just couldn't see it. Holding your own perception together when someone is actively working to undermine it, that takes something. I don't have a clean word for it. Stubbornness, maybe. Or just love that refused to accept the story it was being told. My mother is in her own place now. She called me on a Tuesday for no reason. We talked for over an hour. That's what the paper trail was for. That Tuesday phone call. That's what it was always for.